Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Coming up next on Another View, it's been 1 year since Michael Brown was gunned down by Officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, leading to riots in the streets, protests across the nation, and changes in both city and police leadership in Ferguson. But a year later, what have we learned? Anything? And Congressman Bobby Scott says our federal prison system is too big and it costs too much, and he's proposed a new law to change it. Will it work? Roger, Carol, Will, and Bill weigh in. The Another View Roundtable is next, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
And happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Just want to take a moment to thank all of you for the positive thoughts and good wishes for Lisa, Victor, and me last week as we were finalists for a Salute to Excellence Award from the National Association of Black Journalists. Unfortunately, we didn't win, but it was an honor to be nominated. And our Lisa Godley also had a chance to interview some great actors while we were out in Minneapolis. So listen out for her story over the upcoming weeks. But you know what's always a winner? Our Another View Roundtable. So how you like that for a transition? Please welcome Roger Chesley. He's a columnist for the Virginian Pilot, and you can read his columns every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Hey, Roger.
Hello, Barb.
How are you?
I'm still here.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you so much. Ms. Carol Pretlow, you can find her teaching political science over at Norfolk State University. Hi, Carol. How you doing?
I'm fine.
Thanks for being here today. Mr. Bill Thomas, who's our community activist. How you feeling, Bill?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Glad to have you here today.
Yeah, sure.
And he's a journalist, a talk show host, an author, and a professor, Mr. Wil LaVeist. How are you, sir?
Always a pleasure, Barbara, but I'm still getting over what Roger just said. That was a loaded statement. That was a deep. That's one of those, we'll be reading about, later, maybe.
Exactly. I caught it, but I'm going to move on. I want to start today's roundtable talking about the Safe, Accountable, Fair, and Effective Justice Act, or the SAFE Act, to make it shorter. Now, this was presented by Representative Jim Sensenbrenner and Representative Bobby Scott, our very own Bobby Scott, who actually happens to join us today on the roundtable. Congressman Scott, how you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for taking a couple moments to be with us. I know that you're on your way someplace where you're giving a speech. Is that right?
I have a meeting in Norfolk.
Okay.
So I'm on the road.
Okay, so you're on your way here. That's fantastic. Okay, so tell us a little bit about the Safe Justice Act, and then we want to talk about it amongst the roundtable with us, okay?
Well, the Safe Justice Act responds to a problem in our criminal justice system. It's not working on a number of levels. We have, for example, a higher portion of our population in jail and prison today than any country on earth by far, so much so that recent studies have shown that the incarceration rate is actually counterproductive. That is, we got so many people in jail that we're wasting so much money, we're messing up so many families, children being raised without their parents, too many people with felony records who will have trouble getting jobs, that we're actually adding to crime, not doing anything about crime. It's so bad that Texas was looking up at a $2 billion expense to keep up with their prison. They built prison building expense to keep up with their prison population. And somebody suggested to Texas, well, if you spend a little bit of that, a couple $100 million on prevention and early intervention, maybe you wouldn't have to spend all of the $2 billion. And they did. They did rehabilitation in prison. They did prevention, early intervention, a lot of evidence-based programs, and they reduced crime so much that they didn't have to build the $2 billion. Spend the $2 billion in prison construction. In fact, they ended up closing some of the prisons they had, and so a lot of conservatives have figured out that we're just wasting money, and a lot of progressives are thinking that having people in jail unnecessarily just isn't right. And so we had a year-and-a-half study of the criminal justice system top to bottom to see what we can do. And the Safe Justice Act is a product of that. It starts with prevention, early intervention, better policing, diversion when you get into court, a significant scaling back of mandatory minimums, which is a major culprit in over-incarceration. People with low-level offenses getting decades in prison. Prison reform, so instead of warehousing, you actually do rehabilitation. A complete review of the criminal justice system, and we have a lot of initiatives that will reduce crime and save money. And we've gotten a lot of broad-based support, not only in Congress, but many organizations, liberal and conservative, have endorsed the legislation.
So where is the bill now, Congressman?
We just introduced it about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we're getting co-sponsors. We've got 20 Republican and 20 Democratic co-sponsors, which if anybody follows any significant piece of legislation, you usually get like 90 on one side and 1 on the other side, and then you call it bipartisan because you found one person on the other side to support it. Having 20 and 20 is a major accomplishment, and we've got organizations on the liberal side like the NAACP, the ACLU, National Organization for Black Law Enforcement Executives, and conservatives are supporting it. The Koch brothers are strong supporters. Newt Gingrich, Grover Norquist, former president of the NRA, wrote a letter in support. So we've got conservative and liberal groups recognizing that we can do a lot better if we get away from the slogans and sound bites and get down to evidence-based approaches that will actually reduce crime and save money.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, Congressman Roger Chesley talking to you. So what's the next step? Do you have any support on the Senate side for this as well?
There are discussions on the Senate side. They're trying to negotiate a comprehensive bill. They're not having the kind of success that we've had in the House so far. But the Speaker of the House made a comment the other day that he'd like to see the Safe Justice Act on the floor for a vote, which is for criminal justice legislation. Bipartisan criminal justice legislation is extremely important. And so we're optimistic that we'll continue to get co-sponsors, and we'll reach a critical mass where it's obvious that the bill has the support, and we'll get a hearing and a markup in committee and a floor vote in the House. And I think that the momentum going to a bill like this will have in the Senate will provoke them and doing something meaningful, hopefully passing the bill, but something meaningful, particularly on mandatory minimum. Because that is just loaded up. You get girlfriends of drug dealers serving decades. The president has a proposal that he will consider for commutation people that have already served 10 years. If they are low-level nonviolent offenders, essentially first offenders, you will consider them for commutation. Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing that seems like a good idea, but the first thing that ought to occur to people is how did a low-level nonviolent first offender get so much time that after 10 years they still need help?
It sounds like somebody like Kimba Smith.
Yeah, Kimba Smith from
exactly,
Hampton,
and they're there because of mandatory minimum. Because the judge had no choice but to impose the sentence that violated common sense, and there's a significant scaling back of mandatory minimums in the bill.
Congressman Scott, this is Wil LaVeist. Do you see this bill tying in at all with your Youth Promise Act and maybe pushing that forward because you've been working on that for a long while?
The Youth Promise Act is a strategy that invests money up front to get young people out of the cradle-to-prison pipeline and into a cradle-to-college and career pipeline. There's legislation in the Safe Justice Act that would provide for funding for a Youth Promise Act type activities. Now, one great thing about the bill is the comprehensive bill. It will have funding by reducing incarceration and allowing the Department of Justice to reprogram the money. We can fund a lot of things that cost costs money. So the Youth Promise Act, one of the things they keep asking, how are you going to pay for it? Well, through savings, through prison reduction. Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina has a body camera bill in the Senate, and the price is about $100 million, and he's trying to figure out where in the world he can find $100 million. Well, we have body cameras funded in the Safe Justice Act, and they will be funded by reductions in prison expenses. So one of the advantages of having a comprehensive bill is that those initiatives that cost money, like drug courts and things like that, can be funded by the money we save by scaling back mandatory minimums and prison reforms where fewer people are coming back to prison. We'll have plenty of money to fund things like the Youth Promise Act activities and others.
So, Congressman, from everything that you're saying in terms of saving money, in terms of letting people out who are doing low-level crimes, in terms of helping them to be able to get jobs, to end the recidivism rate, and so forth, on the Senate side, then what's the downfall? I mean, why would you be against this?
Well, the downfall is that many people are so stuck on what we call stuck on stupid that there's never any downside for voting stupid on crime. I mean, you wonder why did people vote for mandatory minimums to begin with? They've been studied. They've been found to discriminate against minorities. They've been found to waste the taxpayers' money, do nothing to reduce crime, and require judges to impose sentences that violate common sense. Now, there's an old adage in politics, when you're explaining, you're losing. So when I vote against the mandatory minimum, I got to explain it. People who vote for the mandatory minimums have never had to explain it until recently. Senator Grassley from Iowa, chair of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, has been a long-time strong supporter of mandatory minimums. And all of a sudden, he's finding his name in articles trying to defend mandatory minimums when it makes no sense. And the most recent articles, he's actually been backing off. He said, well, maybe we do need to study them. Maybe it does make sense to look at mandatory minimums. So as the media asks those who are voting in a way that makes no sense and forcing them to actually explain themselves, we're getting much better support for our positions, and people who are in fact stuck on stupid are starting to back off. Well,
how would this also then affect the privatization of prisons, though? Because I know that there's that economic that is also an economic component to this, and particularly for the states, would it not be?
Well, the privatization is a different issue. One of the things that hopefully will happen is that the private prisons will, and one thing that's actually been an outrage is some states have actually committed a certain number of prisons to the private prisons as a part of the contract. They'll guarantee a certain number of prisoners.
Yeah.
Hopefully, when they start scaling back on the number of prisoners that are there, that the stock of these corporations will start going down, and they'll stop getting into these contracts. But the private prisons really isn't the. I think they're all a bad idea. But the stupid on crime is basically politicians just codifying slogans and sound bites because their pollster told them it'd help them get elected. It's not the prison industrial complex where money is affecting policy, except maybe in California, a little bit in Ohio and Michigan, and maybe a couple other states. But basically, it's just politicians doing what they think is in their best interest politically.
Okay, Will, go ahead.
Congressman Scott, Will, again, a lot of your colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus were supporters of mandatory minimums, and
not recently.
Well, historically, and that's how we got here. So where's the Black Caucus on this particular issue? How are they behind you? And what are you all in the Black Caucus really pushing and leading on now? because it was those decisions that gave us where we're at now.
One of the problems that we have is that mandatory minimums generally didn't fall into the code all at once. They got there one at a time, all part of larger bills that include a mandatory minimum. You said, well, you don't want to make the perfect the enemy of the good. This is a good bill, and although I don't like the mandatory minimums, I'm going to vote for it. And you look up, you got another mandatory minimum in the code. There are very few of us who've just taken a position for the last few years. We're just not voting for any bill that has a mandatory minimum. I was chair of the crime subcommittee for 4 years, and for 4 years, no bill with a mandatory minimum ever got out of the Judiciary Committee. And people, when they'd introduce the bill, I said, I'm not even going to have a hearing on the bill unless you get rid of the mandatory minimums. And for 4 years, there was one mandatory minimum that passed in 4 years, and that was they stuck it in a Defense Authorization Conference Committee report, where the only vote we had was, shall we have defense or not? Okay, they got me on that one. It was a 6-month mandatory minimum they stuck in there. But other than that, we didn't have any. But since I'm no longer chair of the committee, they're gone back to normal, and a lot of people are voting for bills. There are only a handful that have taken the position that they'll vote against a bill because it has a mandatory minimum. My view is that until you take that position, you're always going to get mandatory minimum.
Congressman, what is the Black Caucus united on now and pushing and leading on now that's going to make a difference?
We have most of the Black Caucus support. As I indicated, we have 20 Republicans and 20 Democrats. Chairman Sensenbrenner wants to make sure that we have exactly the same number of Democrats as Republicans. So we have more Democrats that want to sign on. We're looking for more Republican support. So all of the members of the Black Caucus are not co-sponsors at this time. We're trying to we've got 40-some members of the Black Caucus and 20 Republicans that have signed on. So we're working slowly but surely in getting support. But I can tell you, on any crime bill, getting 20 Republicans to actually sign on. Scott Ridgell from this area is a co-sponsor. We have we're working on it. But as you have suggested, the crack cocaine disparity had Black Caucus support way back when. I'll tell you the 94 crime bill under President Clinton. I voted against, and a lot of the opposition came from members of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Go ahead, Roger.
Congressman Roger Chesley again. Some of our communities across the country always are dealing with crime and always are dealing with the effects of crime. How do you make the case that what you're proposing is going to be good for these communities as well, when some of our communities are the ones that are most crime plagued?
Because the object is to use an evidence-based approach to actually reduce crime. Some of the slogans and sound bites that fool people into thinking you're doing something about crime are actually increase crime. If you try more juveniles as adults, that's been studied. Because the adult court judge can only let the defendant walk or lock them up with adult murderers, robbers, and drug dealers. Just guess who's, and a juvenile court judge can order education, psychological services, even family services. Guess who's more likely to commit a crime? All the studies show if you try more juveniles as adults, you're going to increase the crime rate. And people prance around supporting if you do the adult crime, you do the adult time, like they're doing something about crime when they're increasing the crime rate. Mandatory minimums. So our job, what we're looking at, are evidence-based approach to reduce crime, not codify a bunch of poll-tested slogans.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to do something in the area about crime, let's do something about crime. Let's not talk about it and talk about who's got the best vote-getting slogan or soundbite.
I know that you have to go, Congressman. I want to ask you one last question, and then we'll let you go. But I know that you've held a bunch of or a couple of town hall hearings on this week in our area. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of the feedback that you've gotten?
Well, there's strong support for it, but one of the areas of most concern, because we've been codifying slogans and sound bites and loaded people up with felony convictions, you have the predictable result that people with a felony conviction have trouble getting jobs, and it sticks with them the rest of their life. We've got second chance programs where we're trying to get education back into the prisons, rehabilitation, so they have a better chance. But the fact of the matter is, if you have a felony conviction, it's gonna make it more difficult. So what we're trying to do is, first of all, get people out of the cradle to prison pipeline so they don't get a conviction to begin with, and those with convictions, second chance programs to enhance their opportunities to get jobs. One suggestion, which I thought was extremely promising, was if we had businesses geared towards giving people with records jobs. I know the Homeboys Industries in Los Angeles hires a lot of people, gang members, to give them opportunities that they wouldn't ordinarily have had. So if we set up businesses where there are specific jobs set aside, encourage businesses to hire people with felony records, we'd have better opportunities. But that's been the main issue, what to do about people who've already been caught up in the system. And what we're trying to do is divert them so they don't get in the system to begin with.
Okay. Congressman Bobby Scott, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we'll let you get off to your meeting, okay?
Good. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you so much. That was Congressman Bobby Scott talking about the Safe, Accountable, Fair, and Effective, or Safe Justice Act. If you're just joining us, we're talking about current events with the Another View Roundtable. Roger Chesley with the Virginian Pilot, Carol Pretlow with NSU, community activist Bill Thomas, and journalist, author, professor, and talk show host Wil LaVeist. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, one thing, and I think it's a laudable initiative that the congressman has undertaken, but of course it doesn't deal with the whole issue of what's the state prison system going to do, because they have such a large population as well. Their projections that Virginia is going to get to about 30,000. I might be messing up on the number, but the total number in the Virginia system is steadily rising. So what do we do about that? Will the states follow the same lead maybe that the federal government does?
And it's interesting because if you read some of the information about the act, they base some of it on what some states have been doing.
Right.
But I noticed that Virginia was not one of those states that had done some of that work. Bill, you shaking your head?
Oh, no, I think what Congressman Scott's doing is laudable, and he needs to do that. He's doing his job, but the job starts at home. Job starts with good education, good principles, good values, getting to where you are educatable in certain areas and definitely mature enough to follow orders and things. But at the end of the day, my 3 kids don't live here anymore because they can't find a job, and they're educated. Mm-hmm. So what are you going to do with the kids who aren't? so there's a huge problem. It's good for him to start there. Not even a problem, but the real problem is this area is relying on DOD. We have everything going against us on that, and we haven't had the leadership to collectively get together to try to understand what each city's problems are and collectively go at fixing them. Until we do that, it's fine.
Are you talking about regionalism?
Oh, no, I'm talking about cooperation, and that's why people are leaving. But I served on the Truth in Sentencing Commission with the Governor Allen, and that was to lock you up, throw away the key, and do everything else. But at that time, the crimes were very, 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 very high, especially around the Commonwealth. But I've even come to the conclusion that that's just no good. It just doesn't do any good for low-level crimes to be getting all these years, and especially the people that are involved in them at their age. It's a horrible situation.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I like the point that he emphasized that they're looking at evidence-based solutions rather than knee-jerk, rather than slogans. And hopefully that will happen at the state level as well, because as he pointed out, if you've been putting forth these initiatives and they're not really solving the problem, it starts to make you wonder, are people really serious about solving the problem? And that's the question I often ask. In this dysfunctional situation, who is benefiting from it being the way that it is? And maybe that's something that we ought to be looking at too, is who is benefiting from the situation being as it is, and where's that paper trail going? And maybe if we're really serious about turning things around, we'll focus on what the evidence is telling us.
Carol, we haven't heard from you.
Yeah, and I think my underlying question has to do with the economy of the area itself and the fact, and I'm not an economist, but okay, you have unemployment and people who have not been in the system but who are trying to get jobs. Is this going to be competition for them, and what impact is that going to have on the environment? And from a business owner standpoint, here I'm making a choice between somebody who has been in the system and somebody who is not in the system but has been trying to get a job. I think from the business perspective, I would be like, okay, I'm going with the person that hasn't been in the system. So there are a lot of dynamics that I don't think the bill, and I haven't read the bill, so, those are my concerns.
Okay. You know what? A year ago, Darren Wilson unfortunately shot, gunned down Michael Brown, gunned down, shot him, killed him. And
is he in jail?
No.
Officer Wilson?
No, Officer Wilson is not in jail. But before we get into the discussion, we asked
Mike Brown is dead, though.
But Mike Brown is dead.
And Mr. Wilson is walking the street as a free citizen that's adjudicated by the justice system.
Yes, he is.
Thank you.
We asked Lisa Godley to put together an audio timeline of some things that happened from a year ago. So let's take a listen to that first.
This shaky cell phone video captures two men raising their hands in the air just moments after 18-year-old Michael Brown was shot and killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. No justice! No peace!
About 4 tanks and maybe 30 to 40 police officers dressed more similarly to soldiers than police officers.
I know that many Americans have been deeply disturbed by the images we've seen in the heartland of our country as police have clashed with people protesting. Today I'd like us all to take a step back and think about how we're going to be moving forward.
The officer that was involved in the shooting of Michael Brown was Darren Wilson. He's been a police officer for 6 years, has had no disciplinary action taken against him.
To protect the people and property of Ferguson today, I signed an order declaring a state of emergency and ordering the implementation of a curfew. We will not allow a handful of looters to endanger the rest of this community.
There's cause for the Justice Department to open an investigation to determine whether Ferguson police officials have engaged in a pattern or practice of violations of the United States Constitution or federal law.
I'm truly sorry for the loss of your son.
The property owners came and told all the business owners either we board up or they're not going to, or our insurance companies are not going to cover us.
After their exhaustive review of the evidence, the grand jury deliberated over 2 days, making their final decision. They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson and returned a no true bill on each of the 5 indictments.
We need to recognize that this is not just an issue for Ferguson. This is an issue for America. We have made enormous progress in race relations over the course of the past several decades. But what is also true is that there are still problems, and communities of color aren't just making these problems up.
President said communities of color aren't making these problems up. So, Will, in the past year, Ferguson added a black police chief and 2 black city council members. Is that enough? Has anything changed?
Well, I mean, the problem is so enormous that those changes, though that is progress, it's not enough. I mean, there are so many aspects to the problem, and it took us such a while to get to this point that, as we've talked about on this show several times, institutional racism is at play, personal responsibility is at play, police diversity is at play, but you also have instances where black police officers are behaving in the same manner. So it's a very complex issue that's going to take sustained efforts over time to really make a difference.
Roger, were you disappointed, before you give your point, were you disappointed that people started rioting again on the anniversary?
Yes, because, what does that really do? How does that really help the situation? Sure, you can, bring to bear that we want to keep this issue in the spotlight, but you obviously know that some people are there to cause mayhem, to take advantage of the situation. They're not there really to protest. They're there to loot and pillage and try to get away with stuff. And when you have that element with some legitimate protesters, bad things can happen. The point that I wanted to make, that I think there has been some improvements in the past year. We know that more police departments are serious about getting body cameras now. We know that because some citizen and body camera footage has been made available, we see that, hey, black folks aren't always making this stuff up about what happens when we encounter police departments. I think one of the worst of those was in the Walter Scott case in North Charleston, South Carolina, and also the indictments that came about because of the death of Freddie Gray in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. So we have more attention to that. The Washington Post is now tracking in a way it hadn't done before, and probably wouldn't have done without some of the things that have happened in the past year. Anytime a police officer shoots and kills somebody in the country, and already they've amassed a more cases of this in the first 6 months of the year, first 6 to 7 months of the year, than the FBI had ever said actually occurred since 1970.
I was astounded at that number.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we have better things. But like Will said, what is our posture when we're encountering police? As I've always said, I want us to survive these encounters with police. What is the mentality of police officers when they come upon the scene? As we saw in the Sandra Bland case, it seemed like he was more miffed that she was not necessarily subservient to him. And this is for somebody who didn't signal when she changed lanes. And I know, just driving around here, how often that happens in the course of getting from home to work. So what kind of foolishness was that? So, yes, I think there have been improvements, partly because of some of the attention that's been brought to this. But, of course, lots more work that needs to be done.
Bill?
I don't know what to say. There hasn't. You want to talk about evidence-based? Evidence will tell you that murders in the African-American community have gone higher, much higher, significantly higher. In Baltimore, Chicago, we started back with Black Power in 63 and Martin Luther King in 68 and Rodney King in, 74, 5, 80, whatever. And things aren't changing. They're just not changing because you cannot have external power placed on top of people that have lost all hope, are uneducated and jobless, and don't respect the value of morality and values in marriage and taking care of their families. I mean, so it just really boils down to that as far as I'm concerned. It's gotten worse. The numbers since the last time they did Ferguson have gotten worse. And do you elect one or two people to – it isn't a political issue. It's a moral issue. When we were growing up, were put under more stress by cops, regardless, than they ever have saw. Actually, you couldn't even look at a white woman in some areas when I was growing up in Natchez, Mississippi, at my grandmama and survive that. I mean, so there has been a cultural change to that degree, but, and it's – I can only look from the black perspective because I'm not white. We were taught we had to do things twice as good, act twice as better, and do everything like that. I had a student walk up to me the other day and say, Mr. Thomas, you're right. We got to do things 3 times as better, 3 times as safety. I mean, we got to do all these things because the institutionalized racism, which I agree, which exists here because we don't deal with that. We don't deal with it when we say the first Africans landed in Jamestown. They did not. They landed in Hampton. I mean, so if we don't correct the history, John Brown was a terrorist. No, General Magruder was a terrorist when he burned down Hampton. When they allowed blacks to freeze to set up in camps. But we don't teach the history, so we don't know it. Our leadership don't enforce it on our community. And there's the thing that gets me the most, and I'll let you Will go, but it's the ministers and our religious leaders are not even saying anything outside of their churches that I've seen on the news. Nobody's gotten up and say, this is terrible. I saw a minister from Baltimore got up and say, well, we got to get more police under control and more this and that and the other. Why don't you tell the young men and the young women to act responsibly? I mean, and you can't go out here and do this. You'll get killed.
I don't necessarily agree with that last part, because I think a lot of ministers are trying to do that, and sometimes they do it on smaller scales among their own.
I don't see it. I said, let me say what I said.
Okay.
I said I haven't seen it on TV. I haven't seen anybody march up and tell a reporter, we need to stop this, people. We need to do it. Now, they may do it someplace else, but I haven't seen it.
Carol, let me let Carol get in here for a second.
I'm sorry.
One of the things that concerns me is this breach between the police department and the community. A few months ago, I went back to my hometown in Smithfield, and we had a community forum. And actually, as I listened to the police perspective, one of the things that caught me was that, wait a minute, we don't know what your policies are. You'll say it's police policy. What are those policies? We know the impact of the policy and the result, but we need more information about what the specific policies are, and that means that the NACP, the Urban League, and those who give us information in the black community need to say, okay, let's go paragraph by paragraph, let's go section by section, what you can do, what you can't do, why you are doing this, and then build it from there, because they use that phrase, it's police policy. Well, what the heck is that?
You know, Walter Mosley was on NPR yesterday, and he said something about the riots in Watts. And I want to play a clip from that because I thought it was so relevant to what's going on today. Let's play that clip.
You could feel the rage. You know, you could feel that civilization at that moment was in tatters. And when I got home, my father was sitting in a chair in the living room, which he never did, drinking vodka and just staring. And I said, Dad, what's wrong? He says, you know, Walter, I want to be out there. I want to be out there rioting and shooting. He says, but I know it's wrong. I want to do it, but I can't do it. It tore him up, the emotions that it brought out in him. I don't think that there was a black man or woman in America who didn't understand why it was happening. Everybody understood the anger and the rage, you know, that the police could clamp down on you at any moment. It doesn't matter if you're innocent or guilty. You know, what matters is, you know, if you were a white guy over in Beverly Hills, they wouldn't be clamping down on you like that. And it's the same thing that happens today. It's just that we have social media. So, you know, a woman gets killed in Texas, and we say, well, why was she arrested? Why was she in jail? How did she die? You know, these are questions only people in the black community asked a long time ago, because we knew it and nobody else knew it because nobody covered it. And as much as black people understood it, the white community was completely ignorant of anything going on in the black community. And it was like such a shock. It scared them for the next 5 years.
So he could have been talking about today.
Yeah.
In the sense of the
Same
whole
thing.
idea of social media but my question is, do you think that the people who did not riot and those who stayed in their homes and all, do you think that they reacted the way that his dad did?
I think very much so. I think we're not, you know, a monolithic group.
Right, exactly.
But I think that sentiment very much is the case because we're all living under this pressure of institutional racism, which is at the birth of the nation. And so you can't help but realize that we live very different lives and very different experiences. So that rage is there, and because we've never, as a nation, seriously over a sustained period of time, really dealt with and addressed it, and we still have that rage. I mean, one of the things that came out, I was reading the other day about the L.A. Times getting a Pulitzer for its coverage, and one of the journalists was sort of analyzing how they covered the riots and saying that in today's media, you know, it's almost, how did they get a Pulitzer for how biased in the way that they covered this, which is spoke to Mosley's point about whites being totally ignorant of that kind of rage and what's going on, because the information they're getting is very different. I would just disagree with Bill a little bit on the fact that things have changed in the sense that I think we're now all getting a lot of the same information, and we're getting forced to really look at this from other perspectives. And the challenge is, are we going to seriously look at it over a sustained period? Stop talking about, because we keep saying we need to have conversation about race. I mean, are we going to finally really get to the hard work that's involved with eradicating this so that we can all live the way that we want to live?
Okay, so then when we talk about taking steps and doing things, so Straight Outta Compton is coming out, debuted last night. And the first thing that I hear this morning as a headline is security needed at the movie theaters. Now, I don't know how you guys reacted to it. Let me ask you: does that bring a reaction from you? What do you think about that?
I haven't seen the movie yet.
Not even the movie, but the whole idea of.
I think it's the same problem. It's the same inability to deal honestly with this, and that's really our Achilles heel. The different times in which we made attempts at it, they haven't been sustained, and then one group wants to backlash, and then we just get to protecting our own silos, and we're never going to get to it. And until we break down, and it's going to take leadership and individual leadership to do that. But that's just that's the same perpetuation of the same thing. It's the other. It's those people. Be careful about them and secure that.
There are concerns that people who are black and that people who are of a certain class might be carrying weapons more likely to the movie theater. And I mean, let's just say it. That is the concern.
But in the modern era, who's been shooting up movie theaters?
Right. Who's been shooting up? We know who's been shooting up when we're talking about when we have these mass shootings. But we also know that there are movies that have catered to African Americans where there may have been maybe not to the level as in Colorado. We know this. We know this. There have been different movies or different parties or different social gatherings. And just look at the headlines locally. We've had lots of shootings at parties involving African Americans right here in Norfolk in the past year. I've talked to Chief Goldsmith about this. So let's be real about that too. That's where some of that concern is about. I don't think that I'm actually going to go see the movie, given some of the issues that go back to NWA's founding. Some of the misogyny that went on, some of the beatings that have been attributed to Dr. Dre over the years of people who disagree with him, including women. It kind of has soured me to the whole idea of just going to see it. As great musically as they might have been, some of this other baggage that's going on. But I'm not surprised I'm not surprised by some of these comments.
Well, I'm going right in the hood to go see it too. That's where
there are no movie theaters. There are few movie theaters in the hood.
No, I'm not going to see it because I don't see enough. Because we are promoting degradation instead of promoting the best, finest violinists we have, or the gymnasts, or
the ballerina.
Ballerina. We don't see that.
Go ahead.
And I contribute that institutionalized racism to media pretty much as much. You'll hear every morning. I don't even watch the news anymore. Shooting in Hampton, shooting in Norfolk, shooting in Chesapeake, black 1-year-old child shot dead in Hampton, and so that's what the people, the white people and the black people see. It's almost depressing. I don't even cut it on anymore because you see this black face every morning, and you're going to see it tomorrow morning, and you're going to see it after the party they're over Saturday night. There's going to be some shootings and things. My whole position is in this. What I always was taught, I was born black and died black. Those are two things in life that are certain. The other things are, tributary. So if we don't separate ourselves and be the people that we are and show ourselves in a better light and do things and demand that the TV people and the movies, theaters and things like that show significant things of progress that we're doing, in our community, then I will go see the degradation. But before that, I'm not gonna even spend 1 red cent on that until I see some of the magnificence that is going on in our community displayed in the media. And if they could at least show one positive thing a year that Norfolk State has done or that Hampton has done, I mean, in a very good basis that's consistent with the progress that we've been making intellectually and morally. You don't see it. You'll see one story. We went to the whatever NCAA or Norfolk State had a football player, go to the NFL or something like that, which is all good. But the consistent story of the progress that we're making on the good side of it is just institutionalized. It's crazy. That's how white folks see us. And tell you the honest God truth, I would think for sure that something would happen to one of those theaters because I just would think that would happen.
Well, Bill, I agree with you, but you know money. So you know why this is, I'm not going to show those developmental stories of people getting an education and contributing. And that's not going to get people spending money and coming to the theater. So
but okay, let me just throw this out to you guys though, because my question though is who's listening to the music? Why are we assuming that who's going to the theaters is just going to be black folk?
But I'm not.
I mean, if you look at who's buying rap music and hip hop music, come on now.
Exactly.
Well,
it's about the money.
Here's the thing. As a nation, we have a sickness as a nation. Look, we had a shooting up in Connecticut some years ago. Little children was shot, massacred. Okay? And as a nation, we mourned it and then we did little to nothing. Okay? So for us to start saying, well, because this movie is going to come out, there's going to be security and all of that, we are still avoiding the sickness that we have as a nation, our propensity for violence, our lack of concern for people who are disenfranchised, who are weak and who are innocent. So let's stop it until you are ready to deal honestly with that. It's not going to happen. What gave birth to NWA? That lack of being honest about what is really going on, to the point where these young men did what we often say that we should do, is find your way, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. They took what was available to them and made something out of it. That's what the hip-hop generation that I come from did. Whether you like all of it or not, that's what it did. You abandoned it. You left the inner city. They took it. They didn't have a stage to go on, so they put some cardboard in the street and started dancing. You didn't have instruments, so they started using a beatbox. You made music with your mouth, Biz. So you abandoned them, and they did. It took what was left and made something of it. And now to the point where I'm walking around in Mongolia, and this cat's in Mongolia blasting Biggie in Mongolia. And they want to take a picture with me and don't even realize, I'm from Brooklyn. You taking a picture with somebody that's hip hop. Really? So come on, until we are honest about our sickness as a nation, and to your point, the majority of kids listening to NWA and supporting hip hop music and all that are white kids, and they're not listening to the lyrics. Everybody's going to the beat. Everybody's going to. They're not listening. They're getting high and going to the. Let's just be honest about it. Get high, going to the beat. That's what's going. Nobody care about all of that. And those cats did what you told them to do, Bill.
No, they didn't. Don't put that
you
on
may
me.
not like the morality. I'm with you on that. There are problems with the content, definitely. But they did what you left them to do.
What their parents or their non-parents let them do.
I'm saying us as a community, as a nation.
No, I agree. But when you're having 70, 75, 80%, or in some areas in the housing projects, 100% illegitimacy, I mean, what do you expect to come out of that?
It's not necessarily 100%.
What content do you expect? What content?
98%.
Okay, so what content would you expect to come out of that but them to talk about what they are seeing?
Because what I'm saying, Barbara, is that our generation, especially my generation, we were the middle class to upper generation. So as soon as we got all of these advantages that Martin Luther King and so many people fought for, personally, I moved as far away from the ghetto of Kansas City as I possibly could.
That's right.
And I went out and got a job in New York City and Cleveland and Chicago and bought me the most expensive Porsche that I could find.
Which was your right.
And which was my right, but it wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to stay where I was, continue to try to fight for what our grandparents and everybody else had fought for until we could get some stability in our community. But when all the doctors left, when all the lawyers left, when all the teachers left, and when all the preachers left, and they still don't even live anywhere near these churches that they're doing in these inner cities, that's what happened. We had a societal breakdown. I'm not concerned right now about America. America's going to be okay. I'm concerned about black people in America. We're not okay. And right now what's happening the Hispanics have taken over. And that's good because we've allowed them to do that. That's all fine. That's all in a competitive market.
Well, I'm Hispanic. I'm fine with that.
And that's fine. That's okay. That's okay. But what I'm saying is the fact that they work hard. They do the kind of things that we used to do. And, I mean, Dick Gregory said it years ago that we're going to keep messing around till the man goes out and finds him some more slaves. So all I'm saying is the fact that we kind of reneged on our responsibility and we didn't pay back. We gave Martin Luther King that blank check that he got that bounced. We let it bounce again.
We got a minute.
And just real quick, Barbara, all I would say is that when Bill's generation is reluctant to listen to the content of this music, because what he just said is exactly what Public Enemy was saying about fight the power. We got to fight the powers that be. We're here having to fight the powers because you left. So we're left to fight it. So that being not wanting to hear the content, you miss the conversation. You miss the conversation. You miss the point. You perpetuate the status quo. And then we're back every week, every month, talking about the same old, same old.
Well, I don't. We get some things done. We
James
actually
Brown,
get things
talking
done.
loud,
saying
nothing.
But I'm not going to let you get away with that. No, I'm not.
That's the father of hip-hop.
Everybody is not doing that.
I'm back. You know what? But Bill brings up an interesting point. And next time, for the next roundtable, one thing that, because there's always this talk about our responsibility. And as a community, I don't hear other communities talk about that type of responsibility. So I'm curious to see how we might address that. Okay. So we'll see you guys next time. And I really appreciate you guys being here. Now, if you're looking for something fun to do this weekend, check out the 10th annual Carib Fest. It's tomorrow from 11 a.m. until 10 p.m. at the Town Point Park. Food, music, children's activities, and beautiful goods. And if you go, check out the Duwafe Thread Tent. You'll be glad you did. And don't forget to check out anotherviewradio.org to find the podcast of today's show or sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. And next week, we're going to talk about alternatives to Western medicine. We're talking about natural health. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer today, sitting in for Victor Bowen, who's on vacation. And Carla Johnson was manning our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and let's get together again next Friday at noon for another view.